This is unbelievable. Michael Saylor is lighting the next Bitcoin bomb. And no, it's not clickbait. He just announced at the earnings conference that he plans to expand his 2021 program, 42.42, and raise 84 billion in new capital to buy Bitcoin. And I even predicted this in my video yesterday. I even wrote here 12 more hours until the next big thing could happen. I clearly told you here. If we go to the comment section, it's even right at the top. Comment here says, a gigantic amount of nothing will happen. And what did we see? Exactly what was announced in the video also happened. I said, hey, get ready. It could happen that Michael Saylor makes the next big announcement here. It's incredible what a powerful accumulation force is behind strategy and Michael Saylor, not to accumulate here. And this can, of course, have far-reaching effects on Bitcoin, in my estimation, definitely pumping the Bitcoin price to new highs here. We are also looking at a statement regarding this from Michael Saylor, which also confirms why it probably won't hold with the 42 to 42 program, but he will continue to accumulate more and more. And yes, in such a moment, the negative voices always come out again. I've already heard from 2 or 3 people again. Hey, I'm selling my stocks now. They said, okay, the thing with the 42 to 42 program is just too intense. They are selling their stocks now because they think Michael Saylor is going crazy. But the other people are just celebrating here. Michael Saylor completely. So we are looking at this in detail here. Strategy doubles the original 21 to 21 plan and now wants to raise a total of 42 billion through the issuance of shares and 42 billion through the issuance of fixed income securities. The SEC filing for an additional 21 billion in stocks has already been submitted. So this is really intense, folks, what's happening here. You really need to understand this. And the interest in Bitcoin is currently at an all-time low, even though we're not doing so badly right now. We're not that far from the all-time high. And now we have these kinds of major announcements. Then there are some big investors who are building on Bitcoin. We have the other Bitcoin companies. I mentioned it to you in the last video or the one before that a large MicroStrategy is also supposed to be established here in Europe, aiming to accumulate up to 1% of the Bitcoin supply. Zach Mallers even wants to surpass strategy here, but that's exactly what I said. Hey guys, how does he plan to surpass strategy when strategy keeps buying more and more Bitcoin? In my estimation, it's very, very difficult to surpass strategy in its current status. What's interesting is that when strategy last announced their plan, the stock initially fell. Do we need to watch now? Let's see over the next few hours and days how the stock develops, whether it will also slightly fall or develop more positively. In the long term, I believe it will align positively anyway. It's just a question of whether it will have a positive effect on a 1 or 2 day basis. Michael Saylor also posted about it again today. MicroStrategy is now up more than here, 3,000%, so that's pretty crazy when we compare it here. Nvidia is up around 916%, Bitcoin 715%, and MicroStrategy itself, with its Bitcoin strategy, has risen by 300%. I think that must be the case probably here. MicroStrategy has its Bitcoin strategy. I also watched a video earlier which covered a very, very interesting topic. It has been debated, and I've often received questions about it. I think I've explained it in older videos. The question keeps coming up, how is it possible that MicroStrategy buys so much Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin price hasn't yet gone parabolic? The Bitcoin price should already be at 300, 400, 500,000 or so. And you just have to know that MicroStrategy or strategy makes very, very smart buys. That means MicroStrategy always makes an announcement, okay, we've bought Bitcoin now. And many people then think, okay, they just press the buy button. And then it's just bam, bought all at once. But when MicroStrategy buys Bitcoin, as Michael Saylor has often said, it takes place over several weeks. So for example, they place a purchase order. And it's not a one-time purchase, but rather it's essentially an order that, let's say, is placed. Buy me Bitcoin over the next 2 weeks. They use it here, so to speak, smart buying. That means, for example, when many people are selling, MicroStrategy buys directly from those selling the Bitcoin. If, for example, no one is selling at the moment, then MicroStrategy buys less on that day. That means they look at the buying and selling interest. And if, for example, a lot of people are buying, then MicroStrategy doesn't buy on that day, but maybe waits another 1 or 2 days to avoid creating slippage and driving up their own entry prices. Because MicroStrategy buys in such large quantities, they could create slippage. That means by simply, let's say, buying smartly. For example, if you make a purchase of 100 billion or something like that, the initial purchases can't be done all at once, but you have to buy repeatedly from different exchanges, or something like that, or you buy out an exchange. And then the first Bitcoin is still very, very cheap. The second, third, fourth, Bitcoin becomes more expensive as each purchase drives the Bitcoin price further up. And that's why you have to make sure not to create slippage here. And that's why you also use the HODL waves here, because there are also old investors, for example, who have been holding their Bitcoin for 4 or 5 years. For example, such people then simply sell their Bitcoin, then you directly take the Bitcoin from the sellers here. And you have a way to definitely get a better price. I mean, you can't do it completely without impact. You always have to look, for example, people say, yes, MicroStrategy also bought Bitcoin. Why didn't the Bitcoin price go up? Most of the time, the Bitcoin price has already gone up on a 1 to 2 week basis, but not on a daily basis. That means you really have to choose the right time frame. But now check out what Michael has to say, why he won't stop here and why what he's doing here is really, you could almost say, insane. But the question is whether it's insanely good or insanely bad.
So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to do this $42 billion and then rinse and repeat and double it and double it and double it and double it. And you're going to say like, well, where does it end? Well, I guess when we've taken 1% of the fixed income market, which is $3 trillion, and when we levered it up and we've got 10 billion, we bought 3 trillion of Bitcoin and we're trading at $10 trillion in market cap, we'll be growing 20% a year. So that's just
to make cash purchases. You have 21 programs, then 42 programs, then it just comes. The next higher program, then you double it again, double it again. He says it continues like this until MicroStrategy, if I understood correctly, has acquired 3 trillion. Either 3 trillion in Bitcoin value, I'm not sure, or 3 trillion in company value. I don't know what is meant by that, or if he means the market capitalization of Bitcoin. I don't know that, because he said he will continue until the market capitalization here reaches 10 trillion, and then Bitcoin will only yield about 20% per year, so only that much return. And then it might not be worth it as much anymore. If he wants to buy 3 trillion in Bitcoin here, that also means he will buy more Bitcoin here, meaning buying Bitcoin at a higher price, or his Bitcoin holdings will be worth more than the current total Bitcoin market capitalization. The crazy thing is that it might be possible that at some point in the future, he just might. At some point, maybe, I don't know, 100 thing comes out, or rather, that can't be because it always doubles, so it's 21, 42. The next would be 84, and then it would be 164, no, 168 is, so you have to calculate correctly. And if he then, for example, releases a 168 program, it could be that with the 168 program, he can buy less Bitcoin than back then. Originally with his 2121 program, because he naturally has to pump in more and more capital and potentially gets relatively even less Bitcoin out of it. That means if you buy Bitcoin for 100 million now, you get a decent amount. And if you buy Bitcoin for 100 million in 20 years, it might be that you only get 1 or maybe 2 or 3 Bitcoins or something like that. And that's the intense part. The further the progress goes here, the more Bitcoin develops, the less Bitcoin you get. And the same applies to other companies, of course. I think maybe some of you know this. Maybe you started saving Bitcoin 4 or 5 years ago. And back then, you might have been relatively naive. You didn't really know exactly what you were buying. You threw in relatively little money, so to speak. But the relatively little money you had back then bought much more than it does now. The smart money. That means back then it was still dumb money if you weren't very familiar with Bitcoin. Now you're totally knowledgeable about Bitcoin, but you can't accumulate as much. Accumulate shares in Bitcoin like back then. Because back then, it might have been enough to throw in, say, $1,000 or $10,000. And with $1,000 or $10,000, you don't get very far these days. Adam Beck made a very, very interesting statement about this. He put it out there. The cyberpunk legend, who some also see as Satoshi Nakamoto, said this. Some actually think Adam Beck is Satoshi Nakamoto. I actually don't believe it. Write in the comments what you think about it. He says here that he is already all in and buying Bitcoin because it's going to 200 trillion US dollars. That's the way. How crazy is that? He is assuming a $200 trillion market capitalization. Adam Beck is already all in on Bitcoin. That's the intense part. That means Adam Beck has been involved with Bitcoin since the very, very beginning. Since, actually, 2009. That means he was already in the white paper. And even such a person is still buying more Bitcoin. And that's intense too. That means you have to consider this. For those whose entry points are $1, $10, he bought Bitcoins for cents. Maybe he even did it right at the beginning. Engaged in Bitcoin mining. I don't know. And such a person is all in and is now buying even more Bitcoin. The Bitcoin he's buying now will probably be so irrelevant compared to what he bought back then. I mean, if he bought maybe 1,000 or 2,000 Bitcoin back then, and now he's somehow scraping together half a Bitcoin or something like that, then it doesn't really make a difference anymore. I also know many people who act the same way. They just say, okay, I bought 1,000 Bitcoin back then. Whether I really put in another 100,000 or a million now or not, putting it in is probably completely irrelevant. That's why they eventually stop buying Bitcoin. Because whether you have 1,000 Bitcoin, 1,001, 1,002 Bitcoin or whatever, it just doesn't make a big difference anymore. Michael Saylor still says he continues to accumulate. Here Adam Beck also says he continues to accumulate, even though they already have so many Bitcoin. And the reason they do it is, what else would you do with the money? I mean, if you earn money, if you create value, if you do something good for society, if you have an income. And Adam Beck, he works at Blockstream. Michael Saylor, he's involved with the MicroStrategy story. If you have an income, you have to do something with the money. And if you already have 1,000 Bitcoin, but somehow there's no better savings option, so you have to get the 1,000 in first, and the 1,000 in second, accumulate Bitcoin. And you can also see it as a humanitarian act or something like that, because every cent that flows into Bitcoin doesn't flow into the fiat money system. That means every cent and every euro that flows into Bitcoin is potentially allocated in a freedom system. That means every time you buy Bitcoin, it also means a bit more freedom for the world, because you're taking money out of the corrupt, a broken, sick fiat money system and swapping it over to Bitcoin. That is, for example, a very, very big motivator for me simply to have a stack here in the hope of having it in freedom in peace technology, which yes, Bitcoin also is. I find it really cool, the approach that says, okay, even though you already have quite a lot, you just buy more to make a statement and push the new world forward. Michael Saylor also says he will take Bitcoin to the grave, then redistribute the purchasing power to the network because the keys are essentially destroyed and no longer in circulation. The Bitcoins are then no longer used and the purchasing power is essentially redistributed. And that's also something like a humanitarian act, or you could say something like that. I know there are also critics who say, yes, it will fail, it will go down, and so on. I'm also somewhat critical, not as critical as many people. Don't see it as so problematic. I do see that MicroStrategy could potentially face some difficulties in a bear market, even if perhaps a vicious circle, or something like that begins. However, one must also say that a lot of FUD is being spread. Like saying Michael Saylor could just be liquidated if the Bitcoin price falls to 50,000 or something like that. Of course, it's not that simple. And Michael Saylor says if the Bitcoin price falls to 50,000, then he'll buy up all the remaining Bitcoin. And then it won't fall to 50,000. Yes, very, very crazy. I'm back again from another location. We just had the CEO of Strategy at the shareholder conference. Explained exactly how Bitcoin, or rather, yes, a lot of money is still available here to buy Bitcoin. Let's take a quick look here. This is very, very important what he's saying here. He's talking about 56.
Under the new plan 4242, we are 32% complete. That leaves us with around $57 trillion of the increase. Billion. As we move forward, we'll focus more on the fixed income side of our plan, through instruments like Strife convertible notes.
So by 2027, you can definitely still accumulate a good amount of money here to buy Bitcoin. They are now focusing more on fixed income. Strife, such stories should be at the forefront. And they are currently only at 32% of their plan that is fulfilled here. Let's see how quickly they manage to do it. So, if you continue at this pace, then, in my estimation, it will definitely be over here before 2027. And then the whole thing needs to be increased again. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, want to be part of it, in the space race that has definitely started here, at least on an entrepreneurial level, I'll put a link below for you. 21 Bitcoin, how you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply. With the code Bitcoin, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. I bid farewell from El Salvador. Peace out.